I, a 32-year-old female, have been married to my husband, a 34-year-old male, for 6 years. Before we got married, he insisted that I sign a prenuptial agreement, stating that our finances would always remain separate. The only thing we would share was a joint expense account, strictly for household-related costs. His reasoning at the time was that he was earning a solid income, while I was still in graduate school and struggling financially. Despite the clear imbalance, I signed the prenup without hesitation. I understood that he wanted to protect himself, and honestly, I had no reason to believe it would ever become an issue. Fast forward to today. I've been out of school for about 4 years, and based on what I knew about his salary before his promotions, I estimate that I now earn more than 3 times what he does. However, we've never explicitly discussed exact numbers because early on in our marriage, he made it clear that he found it rude for me to ask about his salary. So, I stopped asking. Similarly, he never once inquired about my earnings or showed much interest in my career. Our work lives were separate, and we both seemed fine with that arrangement. At least I thought we were. 2 weeks ago, I casually mentioned that I was considering buying a new car since the one I had was from my undergraduate years and was well past its prime. He barely reacted and simply told me to buy whatever I liked. So, a week ago, I finally went ahead and bought myself a German luxury car, something I had dreamed about for years. It was an exciting purchase, one I had worked hard for, and I was proud of it. At the time, my husband was away on a business trip, so he didn't see it until he got back yesterday. When I showed him the car, he initially seemed happy for me. He complimented it, asked me a few basic questions about the model, and that was it. Or so I thought. Later that evening, he suddenly asked me what my monthly payments were. I casually told him there were none. I had paid for the car in cash. His entire demeanor changed. He stared at me, clearly caught off guard, and after a long pause he asked, "With what money?" I replied just as simply that I made more than enough to afford it. At first he said nothing. He looked shocked, but he didn't push the conversation further. I assumed he was just processing it, and I didn't think much of it. However, a few hours later he approached me again, but this time his tone was serious. He told me he had been thinking and believed that we should void the prenup. This is where I might have been the a-hole. I laughed in his face. I couldn't help it. The sudden change in his attitude was so blatant that I found it ridiculous. Through my laughter, I asked him why I would ever agree to that. His response? Because we're married, and we should share our finances. I immediately called out the hypocrisy. We had been married for 6 years, and in all that time he never once wanted to share finances. He had never even shown interest in what I earned. I told him I was perfectly happy with the arrangement we had, so why the sudden change of heart? His face darkened and he got defensive. Instead of answering my question, he lashed out, calling me selfish and ungrateful. Then he stormed out of the house and didn't return that night. Apparently, he ran straight to his family because the next day, I started receiving angry phone calls from his relatives. They berated me, claiming that my husband had supported me while I was in school and that I was now abandoning him after all he had done for me. That couldn't be further from the truth. He had never supported me financially. My parents were the ones who helped me get through grad school. At this point, I started questioning whether I had overreacted. Was I really in the wrong? For context, when we first started dating, I knew his salary. At that time, he was making about $90,000 a year. Since then, he had received multiple promotions, but he refused to share his updated salary with me. Whenever I asked, he would dismiss it, saying it was inappropriate to discuss income. I, on the other hand, never hid my earnings. I work as a CRNA, Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetist, and make $170 an hour, working between 40 to 48 hours a week. We live in a relatively low-cost state, and my contribution to our household expenses is around $1,000 to $1,200 per month. He initially wanted the prenup to protect his property in Nebraska, and I agreed because I had student debt at the time. His was minor, but mine was significant. Update. I did not take a leave of absence from work, but I did take a week off to process everything. Since I'm an independent contractor, I simply didn't sign any new contracts for that time. When my husband finally returned home, I sat him down for a serious conversation. He immediately suggested we go to therapy. However, when I agreed, he quickly backtracked and refused. I then directly asked him why he suddenly wanted to void the prenup. His answer: he wanted to combine finances. At that moment, everything clicked. I asked to see his bank accounts, and as many of you probably guessed, he was broke. He had less than half of what I had just spent on my car. It turned out he had made a series of terrible investments, had secretly sold his Nebraska property, and, worst of all, had lost most of his money to a gambling addiction. I knew he gambled, but I had no idea it was this serious. I asked him where we were supposed to go from here, especially since he refused therapy. His response shocked me. He said that since I made more than him, I should support him while he pursued his dream of becoming a professional gambler. I was stunned. I asked him who exactly was supposed to fund this career transition, because it certainly wasn't going to be me. That's when he had the audacity to claim that he had supported me during school, and now it was my turn to support him. I reminded him that he never supported me, my parents did. At that point, he completely lost it. He yelled that I was lucky to have him, that he should have dumped me for a younger woman. In response, I snapped, telling him I should have dumped him for a younger man. Yes, it was childish, but I couldn't hold back anymore. Then he took it even further. He said it was unnatural for me to be making more than he was, and that we should have had at least 3 kids by now. That was my breaking point. I lost it. I told him the only younger women who would date him would be either drunk or desperate, because he had red flags written all over him. After that, I packed a bag, went to a friend's house, and reached out to a divorce attorney. A friend recommended a good one, and I have a meeting scheduled this week to start the process. I texted my husband to let him know that I was filing for divorce. His response? He told me he would never sign the divorce papers and that I was stuck with him whether I liked it or not. Honestly, everything has happened so fast that I'm still in shock. I don't even know if I overreacted by bringing up divorce so quickly. But at this point, I don't see another way forward. So that's the update. I'm not sure what comes next, but if you were in my position, what would you do?